Since the vast majority of lossless scaling users are primarily interested in the frame generation, I'll be going over the frame generation guide first, and then at the end of the video, I'll do a brief run through of the scaling options. And also, if you want to skip all the explanation about the purpose of frame generation, where it's best used, that's going to take up a good portion of the first part of the video, so just use the chapters to skip past that part if you don't want to hear it, if you already know what you're doing. Okay, so why do we want to use frame generation in the first place? The main use case really is for games that are hard capped in their frame rate. That's going to be a lot of old games. And most commonly, that's going to be 50 or 60 frames a second. 50 is only for PAL games, though, so I guess it's not that common. The rarer FPS caps would be like 30, 15, 20. 15 is Abuse, 20 is Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. A lot of these games, they've got ports now, but not all of them do, right? So that's why I was really interested in lossless scaling to begin with. That's one of the best use cases for it, is if you have a game that is locked to 60 frames a second and you want to raise that frame rate to 240, maybe higher in the future. That's what we can do right now with the 4X. And then in that same category, a game that is CPU bound, not GPU bound, but you're kind of hitting the ceiling on how many frames you can get. It's not a cap, it's just you can't really get above, let's say, 300 FPS consistently. Like maybe League of Legends, you can't get above 300 FPS, and then, or without any drops, right? And then you want to interpolate that to 600 on a 600 hertz monitor, if those ever come out, something like that, right? That would be also an ideal case for lossless scaling frame generation. So the second best would be a game that is GPU bound. So the reason you want to increase your frame rate with frame generation, you don't have the GPU power to push more frames, but it is still possible to lower your graphics settings or lower the resolution and get enough performance, get like 60 base FPS at least, that you're going to have a good output frame rate and you're going to have good quality interpolation. And then the third case, this is the worst case. This is if you have really low-end hardware, or you're playing a really graphically intensive game like Cyberpunk 2077 with just everything cranked. You're getting like 30 frames a second. Your GPU's maxed out. Yeah, that's not good. And then also games that are capped to, 15, 30 FPS, 20 FPS. That would fit in this category. Flash games, a lot of those are 20 or 30. It's because the quality of the frame generation is not going to be very high when you have such a low base FPS, because every movement is going to be higher the lower the frame rate is, right? A given movement speed, the higher the base frame rate is, the less distance you're going to have in a given movement speed per frame, right? And the lower the frame rate, the reverse is true. The more distance you're going to have at a given speed of constant movement per frame. So it's harder for the AI to estimate what's going on there, right? So you want your base FPS to be as high as possible, and you don't want to be maxing your GPU out. So that's the reason why I mentioned GPU versus CPU bottleneck. So for me, that would be like Elden Ring. I can't really do like, if I FPS unlock Elden Ring, I can't do like 90 FPS doubled on my computer. There's just not enough GPU headroom left. So I would have to lower the base FPS quite a lot, and the resolution and all the settings. Still might not even work, and that's on my 3080. It's just not a very optimized game. And then, like maybe if I targeted 40 FPS or 60 FPS with the max settings and 1080p, then it would be worth doing it, right? Cyberpunk 2077, DF did a video where they did like maxed out Cyberpunk, and they did LSFG versus DLSS versus FSR, and lossless scaling was using all the available graphics power that's left, right? So it increased the latency a lot. and you don't want to do that. So if you have like only an iGPU and you're trying to do 4K, with the latest games, this isn't gonna just magically improve your frame rate with no consequence, right? You have to still optimize it. You still have to have high-end hardware to get really good mileage out of it. Obviously, if you only want to target 120 frames a second and most modern games, and you're okay turning all the settings down, then you're good with the mid-range graphics card, 1080p 120. If you want to target higher resolutions like 4K though, you're gonna need a high-end graphics card. That's just how it is, or a dual GPU, or both. Well, at least when it comes to modern, heavily GPU-bound games, with TA, ray tracing, all that. You're going to need quite a bit of GPU power, especially if you're handling high resolutions for the frame generation at the same time. That's quite a tall order, so you will need a high-end graphics card if you want high-end performance and high-end resolution, all of it at the same time, right? It's not any different than with normal game performance, except that it's allowing you to reach heights that you wouldn't be able to at all, right? No matter what hardware you have. So to configure LSFG, first off, go into your Windows graphics settings. As I have pictured here, system display graphics to default graphics settings. Optimizations for windowed games right here. This is the setting that I want you to turn on. And this is up to you. I have it off because it lowers the performance of my Rife setup for video. So a lot of people are going to want to keep it on because it improves game performance, although it might affect Lossless Scaling's performance for frame generation. I don't know. I haven't tested it because I don't use it anyway, right? No matter what game you're playing, if you're going to be using LSFG, you're going to want to turn the in-game VSync off because you're already going to be VSyncing or fast syncing on LS itself. So there's no reason to double up the VSync. So here in NVCP, if you're on AMD, you can skip this part. You're going to put the Vulkan/OpenGL present method to prefer layered on DXGI swap chain in the global settings. And then, of course, enable G-Sync for windowed and full screen modes. And you're going to want to make sure that MPO is enabled. You can check that with special K. It's not that important though. It's just going to affect borderless versus exclusive full screen applications, because borderless should be the only thing that works for lossless scaling, but if you have MPO, then full screen is borderless, so everything will work. Back to manage 3D settings. If you go to program settings, I have the lossless scaling app here selected. You can add it if it's not there. And then the only settings that are important here is that you have no cap on lossless scaling. Your low latency mode is off because that is a cap. And then vertical sync set to fast or on with triple buffering if you prefer. If you're not using VRR though, I really recommend that you keep it on fast and then change your hertz to match the frame rate you're trying to generate, or be a multiple of it. You're going to have this config, right? See the directory. I put UI detection off because personally the UI artifacts do not bug me. A lot of people will not agree with this, so you can put it to 1. Yeah, that's the default. I just put it on 0 because it can over detect, and I just don't want that. I want the frame rate to get raised no matter what happens. I do not care about the UI flickering or whatever. I can just tune that out. Okay, and as for the actual lossless scaling settings themselves, you can see what all of mine are right here. They're very general, very generic. They work with my setup just fine. You can hover your mouse over pretty much any of these and get a description, get a tooltip, right? So performance, a faster version of LSFG, which is better suited for less powerful GPUs but has slightly worse quality. The quality difference is really not a huge deal when it comes to higher base frame rates. Like if you have a 90 base frame rate, not a big deal to be using the performance mode. If you have a 30 base frame rate, maybe a big deal, right? Maybe you want to use quality if you have a 30 base FPS. And then also over here, scaling mode, auto. So that would be the multiplier for the scaling, right? And then the aspect ratio, so it's not going to stretch to the wrong aspect ratio, right? Stretch it too tall or too wide. It's only going to be stretching it evenly in terms of the aspect ratio. The scaling type I have set to off because I'm not using scaling. If I were using scaling, I'd be using the bicubic CAS shader and then the sharpness at 0. And that would be only in the case of, for me, it would only be in the case of a game that doesn't have a proper borderless mode, only windowed, right? And I need to enlarge the window. That would be the only reason I use it personally. Here with RTSS, you do want to cap your game's frame rate. You don't want to let your game run unconstrained, because if you do that, it could exceed your hertz, which means VSync doubling or VSync buffering with VRR. It's not good. It could use up too much of your GPU, which is not good either. That can increase the latency. So you want to cap the game FPS ideally at 97% of your monitor's refresh rate, and then divide that by your interpolation multiple. So for me, that would be with 4x like 117 frames a second, right? So that would mean that when you 4x that frame rate, it's not ever going to be going above 480 FPS. Even if it spikes upwards, it's not going to be going above 480. So there's going to be no issue with VSync buffering being incurred, right? If I have VSync on in NVIDIA control panel for LS. An example is here, Project 8, that's really deadlock. So I use this in deadlock every day, and I go 90 to 360 because the game cannot maintain higher than 90, even on all low, right? It's not going to 100% maintain higher than 90. So it's a very unoptimized game, but it is stable when I run it like this, right? Very rarely, sometimes I have some drops, but it's pretty stable. If I cap the game to 90, turn everything to the bottom, and then I'm going to 360, which is only 33% shy of 480, which is the hertz of my monitor, right? So it's pretty good setup. So if you have draw FPS on, you're gonna have an FPS counter at the top left. You can turn it on or off. And then to make sure that you're reaching the same, or to make sure you're reaching your generation target, you're gonna wanna turn on in Steam or in RTSS a frame rate display so that you can see the capture frame rate of lossless scaling is not lower than the actual game frame rate. That would be a sign that you're running into a bottleneck there, and you would want to do something different in your system, whether it's lowering the resolution or whatever, right? Lowering the resolution, lowering the multiple, turning on performance mode. Another important setting here, put the sync mode on allow tearing, and then use your NVCP or AMD Adrenalin external VSync if you're using VRR. Yeah, that's what I've always done in the past. I feel that the frame pacing is better than the internal VSync. You can leave it on default or VSync if you're not using VRR. I believe if you're using VRR, you need to put it on allow tearing. That's what most people are telling me. But I've never used anything but allow tearing anyway, since very early in using this software. Then also G-Sync support, you only need this if you are on NVIDIA. I would recommend you switch the capture API to DXGI, that's very important. The WGC may be useful in some cases, but I've never found one. Personally, I just always use DXGI. HDR support, I have it off because my monitor is only SDR, but if you have an HDR monitor, you may want to turn this on because it's going to fix the HDR colors. So if you're using LSFG and you're running into a GPU bottleneck, what you can do is you can come over here and put the game in windowed mode, or borderless, and lower the resolution of the game window, and then scale it up. You can use any of these scalers to scale it up. That's going to lower your GPU load. It would also help to use GPU scaling to lower the resolution of the whole desktop, right, without changing it on your monitor. that would help even more, because that's going to reduce the performance requirements of LSFG itself, not just the game. It's going to give you even more GPU headroom. If you're running into a CPU bottleneck with the game, all you can do is just cap your frame rate lower with Riva Tuner. And that might be what you have to do anyway. If you're running into a GPU bottleneck, you might just have to do a lower FPS cap on the game so it doesn't drop too much, right? You don't want the frame rate to be bouncing around too much. You want a steady frame rate that you can amplify to almost reach your whole monitor's hertz range. And speaking of that, you're going to want to upgrade that. If you only have 60, don't use this software. It's not for you. There's pretty much nothing that you can do with it except literally like play Flash games or a couple other 30 FPS games. You can spend $150 and get at least 165 hertz. There are 240 hertz monitors on Amazon that are like $130, $150. So I would recommend that you do that personally. I love my 480 hertz monitor. The reason you want all that hertz, so you can see this light is flashing on and off when this photo was taken, right? And there's all these individual points, and that's showing the flicker rate of the light, right? So the displays, whether they're flickering or not, the frames on the display are going to have this same effect, right? So the more frames you have, the more of these segments you're going to have. And so the more smooth an object is going to appear when you're seeing it out of your peripheral vision and you're not tracking it while it moves with your eye. Like if you track this mouse pointer, it doesn't matter what the frame rate is, as long as you keep a good lock on it, you're not going to be seeing this effect, right? But if you let it pass by, you're going to see the cursor split into a bunch of different mouse cursors, right? So the higher the frame rate is in the game, the smoother it appears, right? Without adding more motion blur. And that's only going to be up to the max hertz of the monitor. If you have a 600 frame rate game, it's not going to be beneficial unless you have a 600 hertz monitor, right? So lossless scaling enables you to get a way higher benefit out of using those high hertz monitors than ever before. It's really changed what is practical, right? So I didn't have this high of hertz before. I had a CRT that went up to 163 hertz. But as soon as I started using lossless scaling a lot, I knew that I had to upgrade my hertz. So I use a laptop panel. It's a cheap setup. I use a laptop panel as a desktop monitor. So that's how I'm able to get 480 hertz for cheap, but they have those OLED monitors now. There's tons of monitors that are over 165 hertz or 144 hertz or 120 hertz. So in addition to the smoothness though, when you do eye track, you're going to be getting a clarity increase every time you increase your frame rate and your hertz, right? So if you go from 60 hertz, this is what it looks like when you eye track. This is an OLED, right? 120, this is what it looks like when you eye track, and then 240, this is what it looks like when you eye track. That's looking a lot better. All at 960 pixels per second. That's not that fast, right? 240 hertz still looks bad if you go fast enough. It's still not the end-all be-all. That's why I'm on 480. And if I had a 480 hertz OLED, it'd be even clearer than what I'm using. But it's very expensive right now. So, just do whatever is cheapest for you. And, going from 360 to 480, that's only 33%. Maybe it's not worth $500 extra dollars, if you got this option. Depends on what you want, depends on what your budget is, but the higher the hertz, the better. And OLED's response time is a lot faster than LCD, so you're not going to be having this kind of overdrive artifact or the dark smearing that you can see here. If you're on an OLED, you're not going to be having all that. It's just going to look clear like this. So that's something to think about. So one final note before I go over the scaling settings for a sec. If you're already at like 75%, let's say, of your display's hertz, you probably don't even want to use the frame generation. I would say only use it if you're only able to reach about half your hertz, right? Or just between half and 75%. Then you can cap to half and double the frame rate, right? So like if I was at natively 360 frames a second, I probably wouldn't cap to 240 and then go to 480. I probably just wouldn't do that, right? That's just me though, it's up to you. So now I'll go over the scaling settings. So if we go to custom, we can set a scale factor of 2x, 4x, whatever, right? FSR, NIS, integer, and nearest neighbor, which are pretty much redundant. Never select this one. This is going to unevenly scale with nearest neighbor, or it's going to be capable of unevenly scaling with nearest neighbor. That's really stupid. You would never want to use that. I don't even know why it's an option. Always use integer if you like the sharp pixels with no sharpening, just plain doubled pixels. I really don't, but most pixel art indie devs do. A lot of people do, I guess. XBR, that oil painting look. Anime 4K. I think probably a lot of people like this one. Sharp by linear, that's going to be popular as well if you like sharp, but you don't want to have to stick to integers. It'll be useful for you. LS1, don't really know anything about it personally. I don't like anything sharpened, and I don't like NIS. I really like blurry scalars, and none of these are blurry, right? So for me, this is what I would use. It's still not very blurry, but it's closer to my taste, right? So you could, for example, if you have a game that is a low resolution, you can set it up this way and then just select a scalar. There you go, you're done. That's all you gotta do, right? Only if you're using this one would you have to come over here and be like, custom scale factor, I want this, right? No. If you're using anything except this one or this one, you can just do any auto aspect ratio, you're done. So let's put it all into practice. First, we select a scaling mode by KBCast. We have RetroArch, which is already capped, but normally we'd be using RTSS to cap, right? And then we hit Control-Alt-S, which is the default hotkey for scaling. So yeah, here you go. You can see my frame counter, 60 out of 240. Play the game for a sec. Okay, everything's in order. The frame generation's working correctly. The scaling's working correctly. It's very smooth on my end, but you're only going to be seeing 60 frames a second. And it looks okay scaling wise. I don't know. I don't love this scaler. It's fine. Okay, that's it. Alright, that about wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed my guide. If you have any other questions, just post them in the comments below. Give me a like if you like the video, and a sub, sure. And go and check out my other videos. If you're interested in this kind of thing, I have lots of videos about interpolation and displays, and I'll be making more in the future. You know, whenever I'm interested in something, I'll just put out a video. And yeah, if you want me to make videos about anything specific, you can also post that in the comments. Have a good rest of your day or night, guys, and thanks for watching.